And then it came time to make the record, so I was looking for something different and adventurous. And I found a list of EMI studios, that was my record label, and they had studios everywhere. They had studios China, Brazil, and so Rio was kind of, well, that's a nice
Yeah, it's
idea. You
attractive,
thought,
yeah.
well, that'd be great. But then they had one in Lagos, and I thought, that is so off the beaten track. And something's got to happen if we go to Lagos. It's not London.
Might not be good, but something's going to happen if we get to
I
Lagos.
must say, I never thought that, but you're right.
Hello and welcome to episode 288 of Something About the Beatles podcast. It was about a year ago that I had my present guest on the show for the first time, Luca Perasi, an Italian journalist who has specialized in Paul McCartney subjects. In fact, the occasion of his first appearance was to discuss his book, Paul McCartney, Music is Ideas, The Stories Behind the Songs, Volume 1, 1970 through 1989, which of course presupposes a Volume 2, which will be coming at some unknown date. But he has published books in his native Italy, including a Paul McCartney discography, which will be published soon in an English translation. In between, he was one of the two Italian translators for Paul's lyrics book that came out a couple of years ago. And he also contributed to the Paul McCartney 7-inch single box set for MPL. Alongside the Paul projects, he's also co-written a book on Peter Gabriel, The Rhythm Has My Soul, which was published this year. So, busy guy tackling these subjects in great depth. But one of the things that caught my attention earlier this year, alongside this massive stack of books that I've got, was his volume on Band on the Run. Paul McCartney and Wings' Band on the Run, The Story of a Classic Album, which is an in-depth exploration of the creation of the Band on the Run album, which I don't think anybody has done a single volume work on to this point. So it covers the prehistory, the creation, the post-production sessions in London, and pretty much anything you'd want to know about this album, which by my reckoning still stands as the most acclaimed work he's done post-Beatles, alongside Ram and Tug of War, of course, and whatever else. But Band on the Run seems to be the one that redeemed him, at least among the critics, and was the success that spawned 3 singles, 3 hits in the States, 2 in the world, and gave him this big boost and shot in the arm that enabled him to take Wings on this worldwide tour, circa 75, 76. It was that kind of a juggernaut, and worthy of the attention of a knowing journalist, which Luca is. So, being August, it is the anniversary month, the 51st anniversary of the month the sessions started, under the handicap of losing their guitarist and drummer just before the band took off for Lagos, Nigeria. In any event, it was a discussion I really look forward to having, as well as touching on One Hand Clapping, which came out this year as a freestanding album. That was the project that came in between the release of Band on the Run in late 73 and Venus and Mars in the spring of 75. So that was something that, because it never came out as the TV special it was intended as, it was one of these things that some fans have some knowledge of. It's been bootlegged to varying degrees of quality, but now it is an official release. At least the soundtrack is. Hopefully we'll get the video one of these days as well. So that was what I thought would be a good reason to bring Luca back to the show. And herewith is our discussion. Is this like the English version of what you
Yeah, it's the English version, but with some additions. It's been enriched because obviously many things happened in the meantime anyway.
Right.
And so I decided to separate in 2 volumes because it was nearly 600 pages in Italian in one volume.
Oh, it's no good.
And so I split the narrative part and the discography. So you could even rely on having one of the 2 if you're interested in the narrative, but not so much all the details of the discographies. Maybe you can rely only on the narrative. Otherwise, they are perfectly paired.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's a project I have since way back. And so finally, we're almost there.
Yeah, that's great. Well, congratulations on that. And
Thank you.
it seems like you're a go-to guy when it comes to discographies. Given your work with the 7-inch single box set, it's like this is your wheelhouse. You possess this knowledge, you have this passion for it, and you're able to put it together in a way that is so comprehensive and factual. So who better?
Thank you. Thanks a lot.
I was very surprised to see this Band on the Run book come out. I didn't know it was coming. We had you on last year. You discussed Music as Ideas, the first volume.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and I just expected that at some point we'd be talking about the second volume, but this popped along, and I thought, well, this is perfect with the release of One Hand Clapping, which follows on to the end of the Band on the Run story. It's sort of the bridge between that and Venus and Mars, as it were. So I thought, well, this is a good excuse to get in touch and have a conversation about it. So
Yeah.
I'm happy you've got so many things going on. It's exciting, and it's good to let people know this is happening.
Yeah. Yeah, this is a new project. I had in mind to start a new series of books because, the Music as Ideas is quite a complex kind of book, and it requires a lot of time to gather a book like that. And so in the meantime, I thought, well, there's other things I can delve into. And since it was 50 years since Band on the Run, I thought, yeah, there's no book centered on a single album by Paul.
Right.
And so I said, it's such a popular and successful album. And so I decided to start a series with this very album, and then other will follow.
It definitely suggests itself as the go-to start of a series like this because probably there's been more ink spilled over this album in his catalog than any other, I'd say.
Yeah, and still there's a lot to discover.
Yeah, for sure. I was learning a ton going through this book because I guess one thing that should be established is that you spend a lot of time tracing the evolving narratives Paul himself gave. And so if there is a sense of disinformation coming out about the Band on the Run sessions, look no further than the man himself for what's a seemingly a pattern of, as the years go on, his stories recounting things in his history get a lot more elaborate.
So Linda and I walking along this dark street from some mate's house that we were back to our place, which was probably about 2 miles away. We thought, beautiful, Africa,
Yeah.
beautiful night, starry night,
Right.
walking along. And then a car just pulls up and the window comes down, rolled down. And the guy sort of said, he looks at me, and I said, I got in his face. I always get in people's face. I said, all right, mate, how you doing? What's up? And he looked at me like strange. He said, are you travelers? I went, yeah, travelers. Yeah, you got it. I said, listen, mate, it's very nice of you to stop, but we don't want a lift. We're walking. That's what I thought. I'm like, everyone's nice.
Yeah.
He's offering us a lift. Suddenly, all the doors open, and 5 young chaps get out.
And then you
And
realise.
there's a little squat one who's got a knife. I go, oh,
Yeah.
ding.
You don't want to give us a lift at all.
Oh, that's what it was all along. And Linda was great. She's screaming at him. She said, leave him alone! Leave him alone! He's a musician! Like, that's going to help. Well, music. He's a musician.
Leave him alone.
Leave him
It's gonna be
alone.
fine.
And we said, what do you want? What do you want? Tape, camera, tape, whatever. Well, because the guy's got a knife, he's fairly persuasive. So go on, you can have it, It's
Were you
cold.
tempted then to go home? Because everything's.
I don't think so.
Yeah,
I
it's
don't
good.
remember. We just went into the studio, told our story to the guys there, the local guy, the studio manager. And he said, you were lucky. I said, what do you mean, lucky? You got mugged, He said, no, he said, if you had been local, you could have got killed.
Wow. But then you had to start from scratch. Had you got. It was all up there?
Yeah, so that was the thing. They took all the demo tapes along with everything else. But I remembered everything.
But then
And I had lyric sheets and
Okay.
stuff. And, once you've written a song, a lyric sheet's often all you need just to go, oh, yeah, that's how it goes.
You spend a portion of the book discussing in detail Paul's sort of evolving narratives, in particular the holdup in Lagos that happens in the street there, and how the story evolves and gets more and more detailed with every telling. And this has been sort of a pattern with Paul no matter what he's recounting about his history, it seems like the older he gets, the more detail he adds to the stories. And the value of your book for me is that you drill down and go to the original source and try to find the most plausible and valid explanation for something before it changes over time. And so specifically, we're talking about the legendary holdup in the streets of Lagos. And was it a tape recorder that was taken? Was it tapes that were taken? What was on those tapes? All this stuff. So that is something that I think is a valuable contribution to the Beatles scholarship, that you are getting to the root of all this. So with an album that is so high profile as Band on the Run, and with all the acclaim that it got, you may think you know the story of it, but you really don't if you start to analyze the data that we've been given through the years and find out there's a lot more to the story than we thought there was. So that's my roundabout way of saying this is a very valuable book.
Thank you, Robert. I enjoy very much going through all these details and things that Paul has said over the years and over the decades. I think it was interesting to do, and so I think it's one of the most enjoyable parts of the volume.
Do you think it's in the service of wanting to tell a colorful story and sort of build up a myth around it, or do you think he genuinely believes what he's saying?
Well, I think both.
Okay.
Both things, because on the one hand, I think he realized that what happened in Lagos, not only the robbery, but the environment and all the misunderstandings that he had with Fela Kuti and all the other events were kind of exceptional. And then the album exploded and was a great success. So at some point he probably thought, well, I can add something to this incredible story, and it becomes mythical at some point. But on the other hand, I think you remember obviously what happened just afterwards. Then time passes and you misremember things, or maybe you want to forget what happened, or you want to build what happened in a more comfortable way, psychologically speaking. And it's not typical only of Paul. I think it could happen to any one of us unconsciously. So yeah, it was a frightening moment, a frightening event. We all know that the day after he fainted. So that's another thing I try to put the link between these two events. Because probably there is a link. And so when you think about a robbery and then the day after you faint, there's a kind of connection. There's some connection. And so at some point, I think Paul has had to come to terms with what happened. Mm-hmm. And so I think he started remembering things slightly differently, about the fact that he has to re-record the songs. Maybe we will delve into it later. But it's part of the myth of Band on the Run, and I think people are fascinated by this kind of things. And so when you are, in the case of Paul, the narrator of this story, well, you can basically say whatever you want.
Right. Yeah. So the part specifically that we're alluding to is he described, and this happened, and you've pegged it to a date, September 17th, 1973, that he and Linda were walking, not driving, not getting transport, to Denny's place where he was staying in the hotel. And a car pulled to the curb, 5 guys jumped out and robbed them at knife point. The story that evolved from this incident was that they relieved him of cassette tapes he had on him, which in each telling got a little more detailed, but basically it was that these were the demos for the Band on the Run album, and without them, he suddenly had to record everything from memory instead of having these demos to rely on. And as we know, as you point out in the book, they had already tracked 7 songs and they were getting ready to leave anyway. They left 2 days later, so it didn't happen quite that way. And we don't even know if tapes were really taken at all, because initially he said his tape recorder was taken. And why you would be schlepping around cassettes of an album you've already mostly recorded in the streets of Lagos doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But it is a great dramatic story. of recreating that magnificent album from memory under that added stress of everything else that was going on.
Yeah, it's an incredible story, but as we can see through the book, it didn't happen that way, and we still don't know really what happened, because I can tell you that I started thinking about what happened in Lagos many years ago. I was researching for an Italian book of mine that I published in 2016, which it will be out quite shortly, as the Beatles after the Beatles. And when it came to Band on the Run, I had found a sentence by Paul, a quote, and he said that we were robbed after a couple of weeks or something like that. So at that point, I thought, well, if they were there for 3 weeks and they were robbed after 2 weeks, I thought, well, they have recorded the majority of the songs, even without knowing the exact dates. And so when I thought about it and I was researching for this book, I wanted to gather all the quotes I can find from Paul about this event. And you can really follow specific pattern. What is strange to me is that you are walking down the street with a cassette recorder or whatever, and you suddenly lose all the songs, all the recordings. And during the interviews, Paul has said original demos, has said home demos, has said a lot of things. So we still don't know which kind of demos he brought with himself in Lagos. Someone says Wings rehearsal from Scotland, July, August 1973. But the latest version is home demos. So probably the acoustic demos that Paul has prepared in view of the sessions. Who knows? We will never know, I fear, because we'll know at some point, then the mystery is solved. And I don't think it helps in many ways. And for sure, it was a traumatic event. And we got to remember that Paul has even built a movie about a robbery of a tapes, Give My Regards to Broad Street, which is centered on some robbery of tapes. So I think it's something in the back of his memory, in the back of his mind. And so it's another way to think about what happened and to come to terms with it. But anyway, it's fascinating to follow this path, this narrative, because it's a narrative.
Mm-hmm.
As we were saying before, maybe it's not done on purpose, but it's a narrative anyway. And so having a book like this that puts together all the pieces, I think it's important. It's an important part of McCartney's history and of his recordings. So I think the readers can enjoy really going through all these different versions.
Yes, absolutely. And drawing whatever conclusions you may from that, because as you say, we'll probably never know unless these cassettes surface, if they in fact are out there in the wild somewhere 50 years plus later. But another thing you allude to as a mystery is why Legos in the first place. And again, we have the story, we wanted to do something different. And he definitely did, at a certain point in the 70s, have a pattern of wanting a different approach and locale to each project, such as going to Nashville, such as recording London Town on a boat, such as going to Limthey Castle for Back to the Egg. So that was absolutely an established pattern. And the story has always been with Band on the Run that he wanted to go to some exotic facility that EMI had somewhere in the world, and Lagos was the one that he landed on. And there were ostensibly the reason being that Ginger Baker had a studio nearby, and Denny certainly had a connection with Ginger. Paul knew him. That might have been one reason. And per your book, Ginger Baker takes credit for Paul coming to Lagos at all to record the Band on the Run album, but it was definitely a point of contention between them as it happened. But it did not make sense from a logistics perspective. It was the wrong time of year. The facility was not properly set up. And you feel that there maybe is more to the story?
There are different reasons for the choice of Lagos. The first is tax reasons. We all know that even Paul admitted it, that English taxes, Britain taxes, were very high at the time. And so recording in another place would be favorable for him. So that's definitely one reason. I think it was quite well planned ahead because there's a couple of articles from that era. And so all Wings members knew they were going to Lagos. And I think I have found quite an interesting thing on the net years ago. There was a kind of a assistant engineer or someone, I can't remember the name, who was at Apple Studio.
Tony Clark?
When Paul, no, it's someone I don't know. It's not Tony Clark. This assistant was present when Paul and Ringo were working on 6 o'clock.
Okay.
So we're talking about April 1973. And he says that Paul was talking about Lagos.
Wow.
So, I mean, we can be pretty sure that at least in spring, the trip was already planned. And then there's probably another factor. It was quite casual. I think that Geoff Emerick recalled that Paul and Linda's like just pointing their finger on a map and just choosing Lagos quite accidentally. I'm not really sure because, as you were saying, Paul was present when Fela Kuti was recording in Abbey Road in the summer of 1971. So I think Africa was in the back of his mind since quite some time. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of reasons behind it. It adds some mystery to say, well, okay, Africa, rhythm, percussion and stuff. It could be a combination of all these things. Yeah, definitely.
Uh-huh. Now, when they did plan the trip, was it always booked for 3 weeks? That was the hard stop, that they then were going to go back to London, and whatever they had in hand was finished. They would do the rest in London. Or did they curtail it because of what they found down there and things sort of turning south?
Not completely sure. Paul has always said 3 weeks. I think it's quite a good period for recording even 10 songs or whatever. Mm-hmm. They recorded 7 and all the rest was done in London. But I think he planned to do something back home. Mm-hmm. It's quite typical of Paul. You cannot really say, okay, I'm going to Africa, I'm going to record all the parts. Paul loves to overdub a lot, quite a lot. And so, yeah, I mean, a period of overdubbing in London, I think it was planned as well. Mm-hmm. So he cannot do an album without going into Abbey Road or Air Studios or whatever. He got a lot of ideas and the arrangements, maybe require an orchestra, solos and stuff. He got a lot of ideas. So I think the overdubbing session in London that also included new recordings were absolutely planned way ahead.
Mm-hmm. And it does seem like whatever point this idea came about, and you say at least documented as early as spring of 73, and of course Wings was still the 5-man band at that point, that the 2 strikes he got on the eve of setting out, first Henry quitting and then Denny Sywell, didn't give him pause. And it seems to be a part of his character that you put him in this corner and he's going to respond with an "I'll show you," rather than, okay, let's take a time out and regroup and rethink this. No, he's going to plow straight ahead. And it so happened that the 2 guys that he lost, the lead guitarist and the drummer, were both roles he could step into quite comfortably.
Oh, absolutely. As you were saying, it's part of Paul's character. If you just challenge him, he will show you that no challenge is too big for him.
Mm-hmm. And you point out in hindsight, in interviews that both men gave later, they regretted it, though they had their reasons at the time. Is that something you think they would have been able in real time to get past their grievances had they taken a time out or had a rethink before they made such a decisive move? Or do you think it was more hindsight, well, this was a huge album, I should have been part of this?
Well, saying no to Paul McCartney is not easy. to do.
Right.
And I think they were both conscious. It was a kind of a brave move. And to some extent, I think Paul admired them for doing that.
For saying no to him.
Yeah. After time passes, also in the case of Henry and Denny, and they saw the great success of Band on the Run. And what happened after, at some point, you can really think, well, it was a stupid decision, but it's not right to think about your decision in insight. When you do something, you have a reason why. So it's too easy to think about it and say, well, maybe I should have done this or that. Then he said something like, well, maybe I could have tried talking to Paul about the contract and the money and stuff, and I didn't, and maybe it was not a good move. But in the end, he did it. And you know that your career at that point will be different.
Mm-hmm.
That's it. But I think they had their reasons. Henry was not so happy about, I think, the whole direction of the band was not linked to one episode. We all know what happened. They were arguing, him and Paul, about a specific riff, the riff for No Words
Right.
by Danny Lane. But obviously, it is a pretext to say, okay, I've had enough. But there were other things that happened before. He was not happy about Linda's contribution. He said something like that. So it's always a combination of things. And so being not happy about your move when you see an album like Band on the Run became so big, so successful, such a milestone, I can see why they have these second thoughts about it.
Henry, it seems like a lot more of an obvious thing of him being on borrowed time in that group because their philosophies seem to be so different. That Paul was very much the kind of guy that would orchestrate parts of a recording and want them played a certain way. And they, in fact, butted heads over the most memorable thing he did in Wings, which is the guitar solo for My Love. And Henry wanted to wing it, and it was this big leap of faith. Could he pull it off in real time? I think with the orchestra playing at the same time, and he did it. But then Paul's like, okay, now you're going to have to play that the same way every single time on stage. And that is completely at odds with Henry's philosophy as a guitar player. He wants to live in the moment and improvise. So it just seems like those two philosophies were kind of going to butt heads eventually.
Yeah, I think the thing you said is spot on. So I think there's one reason why Paul chose Henry in the beginning, exactly because he was a bluesman. And we got to remember also that there was an article when Wings were forming that said that the band would be called Paul McCartney Blues Band, which I don't know where they got this information. But anyway, at the beginning, Wings were kind of blues. They did the university tour, which was all improvisation. And so I think Henry fits perfectly at that time. So then things changed. There was a Wings Over Europe tour, which was more organized, but still there were room for Henry to do some of his things on stage. Then when he came to Red Rose Speedway, we all know what happened with the double album, and that was cut down to a single album. And you still can hear some really great contribution from Henry. There's a lot of guitar licks, which I like. It's not really blues. It's more poppy kind of material. And so, well, Milo was the peak of his Wings career with this fantastic solo. Then he came to completely different material, Live and Let Die. So I think Henry perfectly understood what was going on. A different direction for the group, a different direction for him as well, arrangements and stuff. We got to consider that Paul privileged the song. And so if the song requires an arrangement where there's no guitar solo, well, there's no guitar solo. The Wings were not a classic band with bass, two guitars, drums, and keyboards. There were a lot of lineup changes. You got to be available to play some bass, like in the case of Danny Lane, or percussion, or singing, a lot of stuff. And so it's not easy for Henry at that point. So I think he understood, and then what happened in Scotland was just the last event of a string of things that he sensed.
Hmm. Yeah. If Linda hadn't been an issue with him, it's doubtful he would have stuck around anyway, just for purely musical reasons, with the role expected of him that was not what he signed up for.
Yeah, I mean, but when you join Wings and you know that Paul and Linda are the core of the band, then to me it makes no sense to really to say, well, but Linda is not that experienced, blah blah blah. They all knew that, and that was part of the innocence of that group. And I think anyway, Linda was very important in the dynamics of the group. Then obviously, what happened is that a musical group is a group of people, and then you can maybe not like someone else, but the human glue is very important in a band. It's too fundamental. You cannot skip the human aspect. So if something is not right between two members of the group, then it shows. So it's not good to force things, I think.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, there are certainly instances in the history of rock where that tension between band members can contribute something, but I don't think it was going to work in Wings. The person you have the beef with is literally married to the band leader, so that's not going to really go over too well when it comes down to it. Now, I had read a long time ago, and this was well before, I know in more recent years, Denny Sywell and Paul have sort of made up and they've met and hung out and all that stuff. But there was a grievance that Denny had after leaving the group where he talks about the rehearsals in Scotland on the eve of the trip to Lagos. And I don't know if tapes of those rehearsals, I've heard that they exist, but I don't know that they've ever been made public or bootlegged. But he went on to say that Paul copied my drum parts when he played on Band on the Run. Is that anything you've ever heard about or explored?
No, he said exactly those words that Paul copied his parts. Well, we don't know if it's true or not because we never heard those tapes. And that's another thing in the book that I have loved to do. So, analyzing in detail Paul McCartney's drum parts because there's a lot to discover. Anything could be. There's a lot of great fills, especially on Band on the Run.
Mm-hmm.
So, who knows if those fills were an idea by Danny Sywell or by Paul? We don't know. But it's still a great performance. There's a very solid performance to my ears on Jet. And then on other songs, I think Paul was very intelligent and he didn't try to overdo. I mean, there's a very simple parts. If you listen to Bluebird, there's only percussion basically. There's an added percussionist that we know was Remy Kabaka that added percussion in London. If you listen to Picasso's last words, it's a very minimal drum part. There's some little errors here and there, and it's fascinating to discover that Paul misses a bit on no words, for example, or listen to the drums on Let Me Roll It, which is a kind of a very laid back rock blues track, and it's very simple. And I think Paul admitted that the drum parts on Band on the Run are very simple.
It takes a good
So
skill set
that's
to recognize your limitations and not to overreach them. If you stay within your strengths, it projects strength.
yeah. He thought to call some African drummer. Then he thought, well, it would be too difficult. It would take time to explain exactly what I want. And that's another very important thing because Paul has all the parts of a song in his head, including drums. So I'm not necessarily into what Danny said. It could be true, but anyway, Paul knows what to do when it comes to drums.
Mm-hmm. I found it very interesting the part you go into detail about the recording of Jet, which was one of the songs that they recorded after returning to London at Air Studio. And as a young fan, that was an album I was still pretty young when I got into and didn't nearly have the same amount of will to research at that point in my life, it was just enjoying the music and listening to it and hearing everything you could. But to my young ears, I remember Jet sounding a little lo-fi, like it didn't have the crispness and punch and clarity of other tracks. And I know for a lot of years, without looking too deeply into what was recorded where and when and all that stuff, just thinking, okay, that's one of the Legos tracks that we know from the myth that's been put out there that the technology wasn't up to snuff, and that's why it maybe doesn't sound as good as other things. Come to find out, it's recorded in London, and there's a very good reason why it sounds that way, which you talk about in the book, which is the oxidation of the tape. It literally sort of self-destructing as they're recording on it. And the question I had is, does that mean that if the tape was adversely affected by the humidity of Nigeria, did they schlep that tape back to EMI in London and then use it there rather than just use what was sitting on the shelf in London?
It's a very good question, Robert. And I think it's quite difficult to know because they had an 8-track machine in Lagos, and in London they had a 16-track. But they recorded one track not at EMI but at Ginger Baker's studio, which was equipped with a 16-track.
That was Picasso's last words?
Yeah, Picasso's last words. So if they had different tapes for the different machines, maybe they came back with a 16-track tapes and they use it for Jet, which was the first song recorded back in London.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe they used the tape they had in Lagos, or maybe it was humid even in London. Anyway, yeah, it's another incredible story that is related to Band on the Run. And also in this case, I tried to delve into it because Geoff Emerick has told his side of the story. I was able to interview his assistant, Pete Swettenham, at Air Studios. And without spoiling it, there's a very interesting contribution by Pete, because in his book, Geoff Emerick was quite clear in assigning the responsibility of not noticing there was oxide on the tapes to Pete. And Pete explains why it's not really the case. So again, I don't want to spoil it, but discover yourself. It's an important contribution anyway to the story of the album, because Pete was clear in his statements, true gentleman, and he was there. So I thought it was very important to have him as one of the witness of the story of Band on the Run.
Mm-hmm. It's amazing. All these stories put together. The guys leaving the band, leaving in the lurch on the eve of recording, going there, the terrible weather, the robbery, the complete, it was like Magic Alex set up the studio in Lagos. It was just nowhere near ready to be used. The politics with the guy down there that they'd met that was accusing Paul of stealing African music, and Ginger Baker getting mad, all these things. And then they get back to London, safely back in London. And the money spinner off the album, Jet, starts to fall apart as they're recording it. It's just amazing. You wouldn't need to make up anything. The truth is so compelling about how they seized victory out of the jaws of defeat to make this album.
Yeah, and still to me, you're touching many aspects of this incredible story. Still to me, it's quite strange the reason why, in the case of Emerick, he didn't check beforehand which were the condition of the studio in Lagos. Maybe he thought, well, it's EMI, so there's a standard all over the world, like a corporation, any corporation has standards. And so maybe he thought, well, we will be there and we will be safe. And then you discover, oh, okay, I can only hear 4 tracks simultaneously, which was another incredible limitation when you are recording. So anyway, yeah.
Yeah, and the cheap microphones and no sound baffling. They didn't even understand what it was. And then they had to build it, and Paul's taking a saw and helping to get that sorted out. Unbelievable.
Yeah, a lot of things. But I think in music, the environment and what happens, what surrounds the recordings is very important. So that's basically why Paul wanted to go outside of London to record, because anyway, it has an influence. It doesn't mean that you go to Lagos and your music is African all of a sudden, but the environment is important, the atmosphere is important, and music is heavily influenced by a lot of factors. And so when you are in a cozy studio, something different comes up compared to when you are in an incredible big studio, not only in terms of acoustics, but also in terms of atmosphere, and the outcome is different. And that's the fascinating aspect of music. It's a human thing.
Yes, and it's not something quantifiable. It's something that you cannot predict in advance. Well, to the extent that he knew that he was taking himself out of his comfort zone for sure, but he didn't know how adverse that was going to be once he got there. And it was things he could not possibly have predicted. We know it was made under very trying circumstances, and we know that it was a triumph after all that. So there was definitely some kind of alchemy there that made this, maybe with sheer force of will. But it begs the question, had Lagos been set up as a proper studio, and had those two guys not quit, if they'd gone there, recorded the exact same songs, and come back, put that album out, what would be the it factor? It would be different. Would it be, oh, it's another Red Rose Speedway, halfway decent songs, it's Wings, it's all right. There seems to be something beyond that I think, despite the travails in putting that album together, is what compelled greatness out of it in the end result. And maybe that's just me buying into the myth, but that seems to be an aspect that you can't deny. It was the most trying circumstances possible, and yet they came up with the best album, the best received album he had made after the Beatles to that point.
Yeah, as we were saying before, you go there, you have a lot of unexpected things going on, but at the same time, you find yourself with your wife, Linda, with Danny Lane, that was loyal to Paul and will be loyal to Paul also in the following years. So the two were friends. They knew each other since way back. So you find in a studio, there's Geoff Emerick, great engineer. You can count on him 100%. And you find a way to record an album, to lay down the songs in a very relaxed mood anyway. And that contributed to the atmosphere of the album. And I think if the full band was in Lagos, were to be in Lagos, probably a different album would have come out. So I'm happy that it went that way, not to being disrespectful to Danny and Henry, but we know what is the result, and we don't know the other option.
Right.
So we got to embrace really what happened. And I think Paul's music is very particular in a way. So that's a proof to some extent that his songs don't require technical skills. You can add a great solo, but the song, at least in my opinion, comes before. So if you got great material, then you can add on top an incredible solo like Henry did in the case of My Love, or like on Bluebird. When I heard the underdubbed version of Bluebird, my feeling was, well, it misses the solo. Okay. So when you got a great solo, it's always a shame not to have him and to listen to this solo. But on the other side, there's great songs and there's a foundation. Then you can build a lot of things on top. But Paul's music is mainly the song. Then he knows how to arrange, he knows how to play. He plays all the instruments himself. So that's a good thing. You know, it's a good skill. If you play all the instruments, then you know that you can do something good, even when other people are not around.
Right, right. You have the ear to understand how these pieces will fit together optimal way. But as you say, it's the bones, it's the song at base. If the song is good, you can definitely have a solid foundation to build upon, no matter which way you take it in terms of overdubs. Now, you pointed out the sax solo in Bluebird, and that brings us to Howie Casey, which I always thought was a very interesting guy for Paul to bring in as a collaborator. I know that he took him on the road for the subsequent tours as part of the four-man horn section. But Howie Casey goes back to the Liverpool-Hamburg circuit with Paul. So a very interesting choice of somebody that would have shared that same musical background. He was with Derry and the Seniors, and they were actually in Hamburg before the Beatles were. And it was Derry Wilkie, I guess, that wrote the letter to Alan Williams saying, don't bring that bum group to Hamburg. They'll ruin the scene for everybody here. And look where it ends up 10 years later. What can you say about Howie Casey, how he contributed to Paul's sound and what kind of a player he was?
Well, incredible player. Paul gave absolutely free hand to Howie. And while the sax solo on Bluebird to my ears is one of the best things in Paul's discography. It's improvised because he did just one take.
Wow.
Then he tried to do a second take, but Paul said, well, you can try, but I have what I need from you from the first take.
Mm-hmm.
And it goes into the spaces of the chords in an incredible way. And so then we got his contribution on Mrs. Vanderbilt,
Mm-hmm.
which is less improvised. It's a little lick. There's a nice anecdote that he tells in the book. Also, in this case, I don't want to spoil it. It's a nice little thing that he tells about his solo. And so when you will read Howie Case's words and then you listen to the song, then you can really say, oh, okay, that's what he means.
Uh-huh. You'll hear it differently from this point on.
Yeah, I know these little nuances, little things that happen when you are recording. Then people even don't notice to this kind of little issues that can happen when you are recording. But again, it's a human thing. And I often said this about Paul. He uses the studio in a very natural way. So if something unexpected happens in the studio, Paul likes to take advantage of it. Like Linda coming into the room with baby James during the recording of Daytime, Night and Suffering, and you hear a baby crying. It's on the record. They left it. And this kind of things Paul loves. That's another very interesting aspect. So Howie Casey did add something really great to the sound of the album.
Yeah, for sure.
Definitely.
Yeah. Getting back to Jet, you talk about in the massive horn section they brought in for that, a bass sax.
Yeah.
You've got that great beefy sounding horn wall of sound in the intro. It's amazing. I hadn't thought about it that deeply before reading your book. And it's like, this is amazing. How do you conceive that and know that it's going to work? Because by right, it just seemed like people might get in each other's way or it'd just be too much, but it was perfect.
It was perfect, and we got to underline also Tony Visconti's contribution to all these arrangements, because it has been really a fundamental part of the work. Going through the songs with Paul at Cavendish Avenue on his piano and forming an idea of the songs without listening to the songs or hearing the songs in their entirety, because Paul didn't want them to be bootlegged. And so I said, well, no, let's hear only the part where I want something from you.
It's like having your hands tied behind your back. I don't understand that philosophy at all. But again, continuing with the theme of this album, this great stress and adversity, in the face of that, you come up with something great. So here's Tony Visconti. You want me to do what? And you want it when? He gives them like 3 days to come up with all this stuff. It's just amazing how they just pulled this triumph out of what should be a disaster.
Yeah, 3 days. I mean, this is another interesting aspect when it comes to understanding McCartney. He likes to challenge people. So we were saying before, don't challenge Paul because he will be the winner. And on the other side, he likes to challenge people in a positive way. So he knows that Tony Visconti is a great arranger and producer, and he says, okay, you got 3 days. And so when it comes to great people, great artists, they can switch into this challenging mood quite easily. And so he said, well, you gave me 3 days. Now I'll show you what I can do. Because, you're working for McCartney, and then you can say, well, if I do my job and it's a great job, maybe I can work for you again. Or I will work for other important people in the music business because they've heard my arrangements. And they say, oh, wow, this is by Tony Visconti. And so I will call him for my next record. So it's a very interesting aspect. And also in this case, human connection, human relationship, a lot of psychological things. I think Paul uses this psychology tricks, but let me put it in inverted commas, very wisely. And so he knows what he's doing. He knows when he has to put someone at ease, and he knows when to put the challenge on someone.
Mm-hmm. And it certainly paid off the dividends in this case. I would think if you go through the whole body of his work, there might be things where it didn't quite work out to his satisfaction, but this is Band on the Run we're talking about. So that's pretty much the apex when we are talking about his challenging people and them coming up with the goods for sure.
Oh, yeah.
Do you think he knew what he had by the time he was done, that this was going to be the game changer?
It's always difficult because for the artist, the real thing is the sales. Let's be honest. And in the case of pop music, if the feedback is not good, then it changes your perspective on it. So I think he knew it was great material. He knew it was. But until Band on the Run really did not explode in the charts with the singles, I think he was a bit worried. I think he admitted when the album came out and it was number 7, then it was number 6, blah, blah, blah. There's an entire chapter dedicated to the sales and to the charts. And you can see week by week what happened to Band on the Run. And Paul was doubtful because, it's not doing that much as I was expecting. Then Jet came out and Band on the Run came out, and these 2 singles contributed to keep Band on the Run in the charts for so long, and they pushed it to number 1. So I think he knew it, but on the other side, he needed to wait for the big sales response, because this is very important. You cannot say, oh, this is a great album, but it didn't sell, but it's a great album. You can say it. There are cases in rock music and history, but if it's a great work, it sells. That's it.
Yeah, it was a bit of a slow burner out of the gate for sure. And to that point, especially that year, it established himself as a singles artist, as somebody who could come up with the goods with My Love and Live and Let Die. He was doing tremendous as far as that went. So an album would have been something else for him in terms of winning over an audience that was prepared to buy something more than the singles at that point. But what did definitely change is the perception of him with the critics, because to that point, they weren't free with their praise, to put it one way. And that was the thing that finally, at least Rolling Stone kind of leading the way. Well, maybe this is a return to form after all for the guy that we admired in the Beatles.
Yep. Compared to the other albums, definitely Band on the Run is more consistent.
Mm-hmm.
I think not all the songs are spectacular at the same level, at least to my ears, to my taste.
Mm-hmm.
But definitely it's more consistent, less eccentric compared to even McCartney or Ram. Ram is a spectacular album, and to me is the best effort of McCartney, but it is eccentric.
So I sat in the attic, a piano up my nose, and the wind played a dreadful cantata. Cantata.
Let's think about Monkberry Moon Delight or something like Long Hair Lady, Backseat of My Car, Uncle Albert. A lot of melodies put together. I know someone said there's a bit of schizophrenia in putting together songs that way. So Band on the Run is pop, pop rock. And so definitely critics were more available to accept this kind of offer from him. Because again, to my ears, the second side 2 of the album is not that consistent as side 1. Band on the Run, Jet and Bluebird, the first 3 songs, is probably the best string in Paul McCartney's career in terms of quality.
Mm-hmm.
The other side starts with Mammonia, then there's No Words and Picasso's Last Word, which is quite long, and then there's a big bump at the end with 1985. But the second side, to me, it slows down a bit. The first is more energetic. But at that point, critics wanted to hear something that reminds them of Paul as they wanted him to sound, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
And Band on the Run definitely is a different kind of album compared to the previous. Wildlife is another kind of oddity. I like these albums. I mean, I like these albums, but we have to consider that at the time, the role of the critics was important, and maybe also in their case, they like to challenge the ex-Beatles.
Well, he seemed particularly responsive to the critics because he got the criticism over the McCartney album, as we've talked about, which is very homemade, lo-fi, indie, all that. So then he goes full-out production with Ram, and they savage that. Then he goes with this sort of almost punkish Wildlife album, no frills, there's very little production value to it. And they don't like that. It's like he's zigging and zagging. What do you want from me?
Yeah, it's always a game between the artist and the critic. So anyway, at that time, Paul, John, George, even Ringo, the four were so big, but the Beatles were no more. So probably the critics were even angrier than the Beatles themselves about this fact. And so, yeah, criticism was quite consistent before, although I have made other researches, for example, about Ram, and, the reception was not that bad. If we put together all the good reviews and the bad reviews, it's more half and half. It's not that the majority was bad, but when you have the most important magazine being so critical, then all the attention is centered on that. And you're Paul McCartney and there's a Rolling Stone talking badly about your album, then you focus on Rolling Stone. But there were a lot of minor magazines and newspapers and other writers that were positive about Ram. So the reception is always mixed.
Yeah.
In the case of Band on the Run, everyone was happy, and finally everyone agreed on the quality of the album.
It's interesting, as you point out, when you think about it, the difference between side one and side two. And yeah, you can look at side two as not having the same sort of compelling material. It's like they front loaded it with the hit singles on side one. But side two has a definite flow to it. If it's not the most commercial and enthralling stuff, it definitely takes you on a ride. It's a nice experience. And then to bookend it with that little snatch of Band on the Run at the very end, it ties up the loose ends. It's that little pepper touch to it. So presentation-wise, it definitely makes you feel like it's a grander experience, bigger than the sum of its parts, than maybe if you deconstruct it song by song is.
Yeah, building an album in terms of choosing a song that starts the album, choosing the ending, and choosing all the different places, the different spots for the songs is a form of art, which is very important. And I think you cannot do the other way around. So you have to start the album with the strongest numbers, and then maybe you slow it down. If you do the opposite, then after the second songs, people start thinking, "Wow, what's that?" And so you cannot leave a song like "Band on the Run," which is the title track, on side two. You have to start with this very song. 1985 is a natural ending. Is built as an ending. And I think this is another important thing that Paul learned through the Beatles years. I think he said that George Martin always wanted to start the album with a rocker or with a powerful kind of songs because it kicks off the whole thing in a very energetic way. And it's a best way to start an album. It grabs your attention. So I think it's, as you were saying, in the end, it's perfectly built. So I have no problem with the way it's built. Obviously, I am referring to Band on the Run without Helen Wills because I'm from Italy, and in Europe, the song was not included in the album. It was only an American and Canada and maybe some other countries edition. So for me, side two is only 4 songs. I'm still not accustomed to listening to Band on the Run with Helen Wills. It still sounds a little bit strange to me. But for all the Americans, it's another kind of experience. And maybe having Helen Wills on the second side gives you another feeling about side two.
Yeah, it definitely gives you a lift in the middle for us low attention span Americans who might be nodding out at that point.
A man from the American record company rang me up one day and said, "Hi, Paul, transatlantic call." "Hi, Al." His name's Al. It would be silly to call him anything else. And he said, "Well, I just done the Pink Floyd, I think," and he said, "We took a single off that and increased the sales by 200 units. And I think you should do it in America, especially Helen Wills going great guns over there. Play on the album." So I said, "I'll ring you back tomorrow, Al." And I rang him back tomorrow. I said, "You've got it, Al. Sounds good to me." And I acquiesced, as we say in the business.
Which I always haven't done, really, because Another Day wasn't on an album, for example.
No, I don't normally do that myself. I like the idea of making an album which is just an album, and then singles which are just singles. But I don't have any real hard and fast rules for it, so if someone rings me up and says it'd be good to put the single on the album, which the American record company did, they only wanted it for America, being basically selfish. So I said, okay, but we won't do it on the British one, just because I didn't really think it fitted too well. I still haven't heard the American cut of the album, so I don't know if it fits. But one way you look at it, it's more value, because you've got an extra track in there. Another way you look at it, well, you've got a single in on an album, and so it's really half a dozen of one and six of the other.
So it definitely was a very wise move by Al Corey, as far as that goes. He knew his audience as far as that went.
Oh, yeah, that's another character, which is a key one in the story of Band on the Run. Without the marketing department of Capitol, probably the story of Band on the Run would have been different. We don't know. If it's true that Paul didn't think about extracting singles, or if it's a gameplay, also in this case, between, the artist and the integrity of his product. And on the other side, we have the marketing man, which wants to sell and pushes for sales. There's something in the middle, because if you are an artist and if you are a singer, a pop composer, pop artist like Paul, you want to sell. And so you are available to use all the leverages that marketing wants you to use, or they want to use. It would have not so difficult for Al Curry to convince Paul to extract singles from Band on the Run, in my opinion, especially after the fact that at the beginning the album was not skyrocketing to number one. So I would love to have a tape with a phone conversation between Paul and Al Curry about it.
You just brought up an interesting question in my mind that I was wondering about, if you had any insight on, that in the States at least, when Jet came out, was that purely a marketing ploy where it switched between one B-side and then it switched to a different B-side? Let Me Roll It to Mamunia?
Yeah, I think that they had some plan for Mamunia, definitely. They even did a video clip.
Right.
Video for the song. So it could be linked to that. Maybe they had some plan to release it as a single, as an A-side itself. Who knows? It's not clear, but if you put together a video, you got to have an idea of exploiting a song. So that could be linked to this reason.
Right. There definitely seems to be some clear intent there.
Yeah. What they do when they trying to promote an album, extracting singles, having videos, anything, it's a work in progress. I mean, maybe they just start extracting one single and they say, okay, that was just successful. Let's do something else. Maybe they have a second thought, It's this kind of process. It's not something that is written in rock. You can change your mind quite easily.
Sure. And speaking of changing your mind, that is a nice segue into the One Hand Clapping project, which is something that's been sitting on the shelf until this year. And maybe for the sake of listeners, you can explain what that was. This was something Paul did in 1974, right on the heels of Band on the Run, filming and recording sort of live in the studio versions of some of the Band on the Run tracks, as well as other things that he had in his pocket at the time.
Yeah, he came back from Nashville where he rehearsed with Wings, and Wings at that point got a new drummer, which was Jeff Britton, and a new guitarist, Jimmy McCulloch. So they rehearsed quite a lot in Nashville. I think they spent roughly 1 month there. They recorded, but mainly they rehearsed. They came back to London, and in late August, they rehearsed in the familiar Abbey Road studio for 4 days or something, and they filmed. They filmed as it was a documentary on Wings. There was this part of the documentary, so the live in the studio kind of material. There was interviews with Wings members, so it's like having something that talks about Wings as a group.
Sort of a reintroduction now that they've been reconstituted following their loss the year before.
Yeah. And then there was Paul at the piano, the famous so-called cabaret sequence where Paul, snatches all these songs from Suicide to other things. I'll Give You a Ring, there's Let's Love, that's quite some material. And they just added some songs that were unreleased so far this year with this new CD, Tomorrow, Power Cut, so some other Wings songs. So quite composite as a documentary. And then there's the backyard, an additional kind of thing. So Paul went into the rear of Abbey Road Studios with his acoustic guitar. He sings whatever he likes. Elvis songs, Buddy Holly, some of his solo material, and it's an incredible performance. To me, it's probably the best McCartney moment, in my opinion. This 15 minutes or whatever with him sitting on a stool with acoustic guitar and singing like he was just a boy singing his favorite songs. It's an incredible piece. So that's basically what he wanted to do with One and Clapping. I think they tried to sell this documentary to some TV at the time, but they didn't succeed. So that's why it remained on the shelf for so long until the reissue of Banner Run in 2010. And now we got a CD, 2 CD and 2 LPs. There will be a video restored. There is some rumors about it. I think so at some point. We'll see if there will be a physical release or not. Let's wait and see. There's some archive material that we are waiting for. We're still waiting for. You know what I'm talking about.
Oh, yes. It's interesting that he wasn't able to find a taker for it on the heels of what was his most successful album back in 1974. That just is astonishing today, especially considering, well, he had had a TV special the year before, the Lou Grade thing, the James Paul McCartney special, so it was not an unknown thing. And he would in the future. There was the Back to the Egg thing that came out later on, Wings Over the World, which took a long time to actually make it to airing. It was produced in 76 and didn't make it out till 79. So it seemed like a thing that was always part of his thinking in terms of marketing. To circle back to that, it's just surprising that it's taken this long for it to see the light of day.
Yeah, I was talking many years ago with some friends, and we were saying like, well, it seems that Paul perfectly knew that at some point in his career, he would need this material as a bonus, as an additional DVD to a special edition. He always filmed a lot, whatever is the purpose, because he likes to do, because he knows that when you got it on film, when you got it on tape, then you really can do a lot of things marketing-wise with this material. And so definitely he always looked ahead in these terms. Probably the fact that they didn't air One and Clapping, maybe it was linked to the fact that he had James Paul McCartney the year before. Maybe that was the reason. Who knows?
Mm-hmm.
I'm not into the dynamics of what happened about one and clapping, but maybe it was too short a time to present another documentary, which to some extent is kind of similar to the James Paul McCartney one, and with another lineup. So that could be confusing, maybe for the audience. It's not Paul McCartney as a solo artist, it's Wings, and then you got all of a sudden 2 new members. Well, maybe they thought the audience could be a bit confused about it, and they said, let's wait a bit. Fortunately, they found quite a steady lineup the following year with Venus and Mars, and they got that great success. That was Wings of America.
Right. Well, it's too bad he didn't bring a film crew to Lagos. That would have been fascinating.
Oh, yeah. Maybe there's something and we don't know.
Something About the Beatles. Created and hosted by Robert Rodriguez. Executive producer Rick Way. Title song performed by the Corgis. Something About the Beatles is an evergreen podcast.